My nerdy crush is kind to everyone but me. You know what? I'd rather take a jump off the top of the library than have to deal with you. You've done enough damage. His words hit harder than I expected. 10 minutes ago. I was just minding my own business, grabbing a coffee from the campus cafe, when I saw Brandon coming towards me. He looked like he was deep in thought, adjusting his round spectacles, and for a moment, I hoped maybe today would be different. Maybe he'd actually acknowledge me. I was still lost in my thoughts when I bumped into him accidentally while reaching for a napkin, and the coffee almost spilled. "Watch it," he snapped, glaring at me. "Hey, relax, it was an accident," I said, trying to keep things light. I could feel my heart pounding, knowing how tense things always get between us. He scoffed. "It's always something with you, isn't it? You just like to ruin things for me." That was it. Something about the way he spoke, the edge in his voice set me off. "Oh, come on, are we really going to do this right here? Can't we just be civil for once?" Brandon's face turned red. "Civil? After everything you've done? You think you deserve civil?" And there it was. I knew he was referring to the past. I had it coming, but I wasn't prepared for this. "Look, I know I messed things up. I'm trying to fix things, but starting a fight over coffee? I'm guessing you think your sorry should be enough for this and all that you have done. Do you think you can just erase the past?" His voice was rising, drawing the attention of people passing by. I felt my frustration boiling over. "I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm just trying to move forward." Brandon's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in closer, his voice dripping with venom. "You know what? I'd rather take a jump off the top of the library than have to deal with you. You've done enough damage." His words hit harder than I expected. I could feel the anger and guilt mixing inside me, twisting into something almost unbearable. "Seriously? You think saying stuff like that makes you look better? You're just pushing me away." "Pushing you away?" Brandon laughed bitterly. "That's the least of what you deserve. You ruined someone's life, Levi. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" The crowd around us was starting to grow. I could see the curious faces watching our argument unfold. My hands were clenched into fists and my throat felt tight. I know I messed up, but I've changed. I'm trying to be better." "Changed?" Brandon shot back. "You think you can just flip a switch and be someone else? You don't get to undo the hurt you caused. You don't get to just show up and expect everything to be okay. Not after what you did. Why are you so determined to hate me forever?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Isn't there any room for forgiveness?" Brandon's face was a mix of anger and sadness. "Forgiveness? You want forgiveness? It's not that simple. It's not just about me. It's about everyone you hurt. It's about the way you made people feel worthless. You think a few apologies are going to make up for that? At least I'm trying to make up for everything. You don't get to just show up and expect things to be okay, not when you've done so much damage. I'm not asking for everything to be okay. I'm just asking for a chance. If you just talk to me, maybe you'd see that I'm not the same person I used to be." "No, thank you." With that, he shook his head, turning to walk away. The words stung, but I knew better than to chase after him. I stood there, feeling the crowd's eyes on me, wishing things could be different. I wish I could undo the past, but all I could do was keep trying, even if it felt like the odds were stacked against me. About 7 years ago. "How did God put such a sissy in a boy's body?" I laughed at the skinny guy with my friends. High school was a different world back then. I was the guy everyone knew, the one who seemed to have it all. Friends, popularity, and an image that everyone envied. I remembered walking through the school hallways surrounded by my group of friends, laughing and making jokes at others. I used to think it was all harmless fun, but now I see it for what it was. Bullying. It was always at someone else's expense, usually the kids who didn't fit in. This time, it was the quiet skinny kid, Rickon. He didn't fit the mold of what we considered cool. His coming out was a recent rumor at the school. I didn't even know if it was true, yet I joined my friends in on the taunts, laughing and making fun of him. It was easy to do, especially when I was part of the crowd. I remember Rickon's face, the way he tried to hold back tears. I thought it was funny at the time, but now it haunts me. I made him feel worthless, and that's something I can't forgive myself for. Neither can Bran, even though I wasn't the main bully. I did nothing to stop my friends, instead joined them from time to time. The worst part is this boy was Brandon's best friend. The only guy who ever managed to get under my skin. The only one who I can't even look at without getting nervous. I guess it was my anger at him for making me feel the way he did, that I often took out on his best friend. Why anger, you ask? Because I wasn't supposed to be feeling these emotions. I wasn't allowed to. Back when I started to question myself, when I began to realize that I was gay, it was like opening a door that was meant to stay shut. My parents had always pushed me to be tough, to be the best, and never to show weakness. My father always was the model of how an actual man was supposed to be, and he expected nothing less of me. I remember the way my dad used to talk about what it means to be a real man. It was always about being strong, never showing emotion, and definitely not being anything other than straight. My mom was more silent about it, but I could tell from her glances and comments at people that she didn't quite approve of the unusual behavior. Sin, she called it. Hence, even though I am out and proud in my university now, back then I never became gay. Accepted, it should be the more appropriate term here. It was true. I knew I was gay, but I never became it. Not until him. It was a random encounter at the library that changed everything. I was there to complete an assignment I dreaded, and Brandon was sitting at a table, buried in his books, willingly. There was something about him that intrigued me. His round spectacles, the way he seemed completely absorbed in his world. I started to notice him more often, finding excuses to be in the library. I pretended it was just a coincidence, but in reality, I was drawn to him. He was different from anyone I'd ever met. He was smart, kind, and had a way of making everything around him seem more interesting. As I spent more time around him, I realized that I was falling for him. It was confusing and terrifying. I never felt this way about anyone before, especially not someone like Brandon. I tried to ignore my feelings, to push them away, but the more I tried to get rid of them, the stronger they became. Generally, anyone would have guessed that I showed courage and overcame my issues, but no, I was such a douchebag that I did the last thing I should have. I supported my friends in bullying his best friend for being gay, and they bullied him hard. That was the way I channeled my confusion, frustration, and anger. And then one day, out of the blue, we learned that he left not only the school, but the town, and more importantly, his best friend. And it was my fault. I had been part of the group that had driven him away, and seeing him leave like that. It was after he had gone, after I had seen hatred in Brandon's eyes, that made me realize the full impact of what I had done. Back to the present time, 3 days later. It had been a few days since the fight, and I'd been trying to find any opportunity to talk to Brandon, but he always seemed to be avoiding me. I figured the library might be a good place to catch him, so I walked into the library, scanning the tables for him. I finally spotted him in a corner, buried in a stack of books. His round spectacles were perched low on his nose as he scribbled away notes with a concentrated look on his face. My heart pounded. This was my chance. I took a deep breath and approached his table. "Hey, Brand, mind if I sit?" He didn't look up. "I'm busy." I hesitated, but I couldn't back down now. "I just want to talk, please." He sighed and finally glanced up, his blue eyes meeting mine with a mix of irritation and tiredness. "I told you, I'm busy. I don't have time for this." "I know you're busy, but you can spare a moment, can't you?" Brandon looked away, shaking his head. "I don't think I can. I don't see how talking about it is going to change anything. It's not like you can fix what you did." I felt a wave of frustration, but I tried to stay calm. "I'm not trying to fix the past. I'm trying to show you that I've changed. I'm not the same person I was back then." He set his pen down and leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Do you ever think that not everything is about you, and I simply don't care?" I could feel my face flushing with embarrassment and hurt. I didn't know what to say anymore. Brandon didn't say anything either, just turned his attention back to his books. The silence felt heavy, like a wall between us. I stood there for a moment, hoping he'd change his mind, but he didn't look up again. Defeated, I turned and walked away. I wish I could just disappear and take back everything I'd done wrong. A week later. It was a few days when I saw Brandon sitting on a bench watching the students pass by. I took a deep breath and walked up to him, trying to ignore the pounding of my heart. I had to give this one more chance. Third time's the charm, right? "Look, I just want to talk to you," I said, sitting down next to him on the bench. "I know you don't want to hear it, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Brandon sighed and got up from the bench as if I had something contagious. I felt a pang of desperation. "Please just give me a chance. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away. I just want to prove that I'm not the same person I used to be." Brandon shook his head, standing up from the bench. I don't think I can give you what you're asking for. And just like that, he walked away. I watched him walk away, feeling the familiar ache of rejection. The campus seemed emptier as I stood there alone, wondering if I'd ever be able to make things right. A month later, I had almost accepted defeat when everything changed. It had been a month since my last fight with Bran. I was taking a long walk to clear my head. The campus grounds were almost deserted, and I was lost in my thoughts, replaying our last argument over and over in my head. I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings. That's when I slipped. The ground was wet from a recent rain, and before I knew it, I was tumbling down a small hill toward the edge of the great river. My heart raced as I tried to catch myself, but the muddy slope was too slick. I could see the river below, and the panic set in. Just as I was about to hit the water, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me back. I looked up to see Brandon, his face a mix of worry and determination. "Hold on," he shouted. I tried to grip his hand, but the mud made it difficult. I could feel my feet slipping again, and Brandon's grip was the only thing keeping me from falling. His knuckles were white from the effort, and I could see the strain in his eyes. "Brandon, your hand!" I yelled, trying to pull myself up. But it was no use. The slope was too steep, and I was slipping more with every movement. "Just stay still," he shouted back. "I've got you." With a final heave, Brandon managed to pull me back up to safety. We both tumbled onto the grass, panting and covered in mud. I looked over at him, noticing the grimace on his face. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. He winced, touching his arm. "I'm fine, just a bit scraped up." I helped him sit up, noticing blood seeping through his shirt, where he'd obviously cut himself while trying to save me. My heart sank. "You're hurt, and it clearly looks more than just a scrape." Brandon shook his head, his blue eyes meeting mine. "It's not your fault." I could tell he was trying to act tough, but I knew better. He was hurt, and it was because he'd risked himself for me. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. "Let me help you," I said, carefully examining the cut on his arm. It was deep and needed some attention. We made our way back to the campus, and I guided him to my dorm room. I gathered a first aid kit and set to work cleaning and bandaging his wounds. Brandon sat quietly, not meeting my eyes. The silence was heavy, but it was clear that he was still processing what had happened. "I'm sorry. You are hurt because of me yet again," I said, my voice almost choking. "This is not the time, Levi," he said, asking me to stop, and it was clearly not a request. When I finished, I sat beside him on the bed, trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to thank you," I finally said. "You saved my life." Brandon glanced at me, thinking something hard, and then just nodded. I wondered what he was thinking. Was he feeling guilty that he had saved me? After a pause, he said, "Just don't make a habit of it," with a faint smile on his face. I couldn't help but smile back, feeling a small sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, this was a step toward making things right. 4 days later. A few days after the river incident, things started to settle down. Brandon's arm was healing well, and though he was still not talking much to me, but was comparatively more relaxed around me. Whatever made him save me that day somehow persuaded him to at least accept my existence around him, so I took it upon myself to make the best out of this chance. I have been taking care of him these past few days, making sure his arm heals well and ensuring he is always caught up with his assignments and always has his favorites to eat. One evening, I showed up at his dorm with a bag of snacks and some of his favorite comic books. I knocked on his door, and when he answered, he looked pleasantly surprised. "Hey, Bran, mind if I come in?" I asked, holding up the bag. He said, stepping aside. I set the snacks on his desk and plopped down on the bed, where he joined me. There was a weird silence between us initially, but soon he picked up on superhero movies, and from there the conversation flowed easily. The tension that had hung between us seemed to be melting away, replaced by a more comfortable atmosphere. After a while, Brandon looked at me and asked, "Why are you doing all this?" I was caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Bringing me snacks, checking on me, why?" I hesitated, unsure how to put it into words. "What do you mean, why? You saved me, and I guess I just want to show you that I'm not the same person I was before. I know it's going to take time, but I want to make things right." Brandon studied me for a moment before nodding. We spent the evening talking and laughing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we were on a path to something better. I noticed small changes in Brandon. His laughter came more easily, and he seemed to be more at ease around me. About a week later. If anything, the incident took away the hatred, and at least Bran had started talking to me like a human. I know he hadn't forgiven me yet, not that I deserved it, but it was better than before. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting with Brandon on a park bench watching the sunset. It was one of those peaceful moments where everything felt right. We had been spending more time together, and I could see our relationship starting to change. The awkwardness was fading, replaced by a genuine connection. Brandon sighed contentedly. "Thank you for bringing me here. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately. Why did you save me that day?" I looked at him, curious. He nodded. "It's not easy for me to let go of the past, and I've been holding on to a lot of anger and hurt, but I couldn't just let you die, could I? I felt a mix of gratitude and love. You really are..." I stopped mid-sentence, not sure how to put my feelings into words. "I'm trying. I know it's not easy to forget what happened, but please give me a chance. I'm really trying." Brandon looked at nothing in particular, his eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "I can see that, and maybe I'm willing to give us a chance. Just don't expect much out of me." My heart skipped a beat. "Really?" He nodded, looking a bit shy but determined. "Yeah, I think I could try." "That's all I need," I said, as a relief washed over me, and he nodded. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It felt like a new chapter was beginning for us. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like we were moving forward together. 2 weeks later. I wasn't expecting my mom to show up so suddenly, especially not when I was with Bran. He had agreed to help me with an assignment that I didn't really need help with, but any chance to be with him was welcome. We were sitting on my bed, books spread out between us. "Levi!" she exclaimed as soon as she entered the dorm room. Bran looked up from his notes, raising an eyebrow. I nodded to him, feeling a bit nervous. I hadn't planned on introducing them like this, but there wasn't much I could do now. She reached the bed and gave me a tight hug before turning to Bran with a smile. "You must be Brandon. Levi's told me so much about you." Bran smiled politely and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Andrews." "Please, call me Karen," she said, shaking his hand a bit too enthusiastically. "I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was in the area and thought I'd drop by. I haven't seen my boy in a while." "It's fine," I said, trying to keep things casual. "We were just working on a project." Bran nodded. "Yeah, Levi mentioned he needed some help with an assignment." "Oh, so you guys are doing an assignment," Mom chuckled weirdly, giving me a teasing look. Mom took a seat at the table, glancing at the books we had spread out. "So, what are you working on?" "Just some history research," Bran answered, his tone friendly. "Levi asked me to help him with some sources." "History, huh?" Mom said, her tone shifting slightly. Bran glanced at me, clearly picking up on something in her tone, but he didn't say anything. I quickly tried to change the subject. "So, Mom, what brings you here? It's not often you just drop by." "Oh, I was running some errands and thought I'd see if you were free for lunch," she replied, her eyes flickering back to Bran. "But I see you're busy. I don't want to interrupt your study session." "You're not interrupting," Bran said, though I could tell he was a little uneasy. Mom smiled, but there was something about it that felt off. "That's nice. It's good to see Levi spending time with friends who are focused on their studies. Some of his old friends weren't exactly the best influence, if you know what I mean." I stiffened slightly, knowing where this was going. "So, lunch?" I asked, trying to sound enthusiastic. "There's a great cafe nearby. We could grab something to eat." Mom's smile returned, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sure, that sounds lovely. Brandon, would you like to join us?" Bran hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yeah, I could eat." We packed up our things, and I led the way to the cafe down the street. The walk was quiet, and I could feel Bran's eyes on me like he was trying to figure something out. I didn't blame him. My mom's comments were anything but subtle. When we reached the cafe, we found a cozy booth in the back. Mom ordered a salad, Bran got a sandwich, and I went with a burger. The small talk continued, but there was an underlying tension that I couldn't shake. "So, Levi," Mom said as she sipped her iced tea, "how's the team doing this season?" "They're good," I replied, trying to keep things light. "We've been practicing hard." "That's great," she said, nodding. "I'm glad you're still keeping busy with sports. What about you, Bran? Do you play?" No, I'm not very athletic," he said, chuckling weirdly. "No problem. I'm sure you are a very fine man nonetheless," she said, smiling as if it was wrong of Bran to not be athletic, and I knew better than anyone that, in her eyes, it was. Bran looked at me weirdly. I knew he must have a million questions by now, and it made me uneasy. I tried to steer things back to neutral ground. "He is, Mom, and a good friend to me." "Of course," Mom said, smiling again. As we finished eating, we got up to leave. She hugged me again, saying, "You've grown into a fine young man, Levi. I am proud of you. Just make sure you stay away from the wrong influence. You know, all the gay nonsense going around these days. It's not right, and I don't want you getting caught up in it. You bring a nice girl home when you find one, okay? Mom, I started to protest, but she cut me off before I could say more. What? It's about time you bring a girl to meet me. You know how I feel about those other lifestyles. I glanced at Bran, who had clearly heard every word. His expression was a mix of shock and something else. Disappointment, maybe. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I realized how much damage her words could do. About an hour later, "It was because your parents were the reason," Bran said as we talked back to the campus, clearly struggling to put his thoughts into words, but I understood all the same. I looked at him. "Your mom, she doesn't like gay people, does she?" he asked, his voice quiet. I stopped in my tracks, my heart sinking. "Bran, it's complicated. She has her own views." Bran looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Is that why you did what you did to my friend?" I swallowed hard, feeling exposed and vulnerable. There's no excuse for that, but I guess that was part of it. I was scared. I didn't want to disappoint them. Besides, I didn't really understand what was going on with me, I said as we returned to my room and I shut the door behind me. Bran sighed, running a hand through his hair, taking his seat by the window. "I get it now. I get why you were... But Levi, that doesn't make it right." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it doesn't." We stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation heavy on my shoulders. "I don't hate you, Levi," Bran said softly. "I never really did. I was just angry. Angry at what happened. Angry at what you did." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. "I'm sorry, Bran, I really am." "I know," he replied, giving me a small, sad smile. "And I'm starting to believe it. You don't know what it was like. It felt like I failed him, like I should have done something more, and all this anger just got directed at you. I didn't know how to deal with it, his loss." "I get it," I said softly. "I was dealing with my own issues, my own anger and confusion. I'm sorry for how I treated you and your friend, I really am. But I want you to know that I've changed. I'm not that person anymore." Brandon's gaze softened and he took a deep breath. "It's hard to believe that someone can change so much, but maybe I'm ready to try." My heart raced as I reached out, placing my hand on his. "I'm willing to show you to prove that I'm different. Just give me a chance." Brandon looked at my hand, then back up at me. There was a moment of silence between us, filled with unspoken emotions. Then slowly, he leaned in, closing the distance between us. His lips met mine in a tentative, gentle kiss. I felt a wave of relief and joy wash over me. It was as if all the walls we had built up over the years were finally coming down. When we finally pulled away, Brandon's eyes filled with tears, but there was a softness there that hadn't been there before. "You know, I have always liked you," Brandon said quietly. "Maybe that was why I hated you so much more." My eyes widened in shock. "Really?" He nodded. I rushed to hug him. "I have loved you, Brandon. I have loved for years, way before it all happened, way before I messed it all up." His arms tightened around me, and that was the confirmation of his feelings I needed. We stayed there for a while, holding each other. Finally, I had his forgiveness. Maybe something way more than that. It was all way more than I deserved, but hey, I wasn't going to complain. Conclusion. After that day, things started to change between Brandon and me. He asked to take things slow, and I agreed. We took our time rebuilding trust, but it felt like the weight had lifted. We both worked on letting go of the past and focusing on the future. Soon found ourselves laughing and enjoying each other's company. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. It wasn't always easy, but it felt right. As we moved forward, I realized that what we had was special. It was a chance to start fresh, to build something new and genuine, and for the first time, I felt hopeful about our future together. The end. Do you think you can ever love a bully? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.